Great, thank you very much, Matt. So we're going to shift gears now, and we're going to move on to the next part of our presentation this afternoon, which is on our cost estimates. Next slide. So when we look at cost estimates, there's two types of cost estimates that our project study has considered. First are the capital costs, and we'll go through what those mean here. And then secondly are the operations and maintenance costs, which will come later in the presentation this afternoon. So first, the capital costs are the design and construction of the project, the physical project itself. What we have here today is consideration for what those costs would incur, including the contingency that would be applied at this level of the project formulation, as well as other costs that would go into furthering the development of the design, including professional costs to bring it through final design, etc. So what we're looking at today are going to be presenting what would it cost for our guideway and track elements and bridge infrastructure. What would it cost for our stations and our support facilities, such as the layover facility and the maintenance facility, administrative facilities, and other structures that would need to be constructed as part of the passenger rail service. Also, our signals and systems and communication network, right-of-way acquisitions and land improvements, and land costs that would be associated with the project. The vehicles themselves, identifying hydrogen multiple unit vehicles in the project's cost. The professional services I mentioned to develop these further into final design, as well as contingency costs, which I mentioned as well. And it includes some certain grading construction costs associated with the coastal rail trail as well. And that's where the trail is located within the rail corridor. But the cost estimates we're presenting today do exclude costs for the major trail structures, such as bridges, as well as the cost for the trail where it would be located outside of the rail corridor. Next slide. And so the methodology developed in order to develop these cost estimates are using the quantities that are developed from the preliminary plans that were developed as part of the project when they're available, or known other values, such as using a track foot cost or a square foot cost for alignment and roadways where specific data is not available for specific quantities. The pricing that was generated, it was developed using cost data from similar projects and an estimator's experience for the project. And we are presenting these cost estimates in 2025 dollars with contingency values set based on the current level and preliminary design. And with that, I believe I'm handing it over to our HDR team to present the cost estimates themselves.
Sure. Thanks, Riley. I'm Mark McLaren with HDR and been the project manager for this work. And we'd like to talk now about the capital cost estimate. I've noticed in the questions that have been coming in, there are a couple of things that I hope I can clarify as a part of the explanation of this, but understand that there will be a lot of questions. We'll get what we can to this evening and certainly respond back to others as appropriate. If you go to the next slide, Tiffany. So I guess first and foremost, to walk you through, this cost estimate is divided into a number of categories that are consistent with the way a project like this would be developed. And so when I say that, that's to mean that we have a lot of information that rolls up under each of these categories and provides an aggregate for certain types of activities. And then there are things such as contingency and professional services that go on top of that because they are done kind of holistically as it relates to some of the different activities that are included in here. I noticed that one of the questions that came up already was the question of the bridge conversation. And I think maybe that's a good way to explain this estimate, because you will recall when we presented the bridge rehabilitation and replacement cost estimate at about $980 million. It was broken into a couple of components. Those components were, first of all, the construction of the bridges themselves and all of the associated work that is included in the field for actually building the structure. It included contingency for the things that are unknowns about the project. So there's environmental mitigations, there's soil conditions, there are other things that at this stage of design, we don't have a clear understanding of yet. And so we provide a contingency within the cost estimate to address that and to make sure that if we identify something that's going to impact that cost or require additional cost, we've made an allowance for it at this stage of the project. And then thirdly is the professional services. So the design of the system in a railroad, it's all of the work to get the certifications for the startup and the operations. It's the work to help do things such as look at some of the technical conditions as it relates to, again, for example, soils and go through the environmental process. Those are all costs that are added on to then that construction cost. So the $980 million that was presented previously is included within this number this evening, but it's broken into a couple of those categories just as the way the other elements of the project are this evening. So the first category here that we talk about, which is the track elements, the bridges, the guideway, essentially, which is the track and the structures that it's going to operate on. We then include the stations, which are a separate component and oftentimes something that's constructed separately just because of the nature of the construction activity. So that's the platforms and the shelters and the amenities that are to be provided at those locations. The next one is support facilities, and this is primarily the facilities necessary to store, operate, and maintain the vehicles. So it's a yard and track infrastructure that's put in to store trains, and then also an enclosed facility that houses the equipment, the spare parts, and the other activities that will be undertaken on a daily or regular basis to make sure the trains are maintained in a state of good repair and continue to be operable. And so those costs there all roll into the first component here, or major subtotal of this cost estimate. The second part of this is the right-of-way cost. And so as we've talked throughout this process, it has been our intent to design with minimal impact outside of the railroad right-of-way. There are a few places where we've had to make some assumptions, and we know that we may have some impacts. But honestly, a big part of this is really the costs associated with the land area that would be required to accommodate the maintenance and storage facility. So it's the land to make the improvements and make that construction possible there. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have the professional services. So this is all of the technical work that gets done to define the project, to take it through the various processes, and to also then develop the cost estimate and provide the services necessary that we've represented within the cost estimate, all of the activities necessary to get from where the project is today to the point that the project has been defined and has the clearance, the permits, and in fact, the work necessary, the resources necessary to get it all the way through to the beginning of operation. So again, within the cost estimate, that $980 million, as is circled here on the table now, those are the categories where those costs associated with the bridge structures and that number previously included are accounted for as a part of the project. In the questions that were presented this evening, there were a couple of other questions that I'll point to while this this particular slide is up. One is the signal systems and communication. There were a couple of questions that were raised, for example, about quiet zones. And as we've talked before, the intent has been to design the system in designing the crossing protection and the signaling equipment of the system in such a way that we believe that would be eligible to be able to operate as a quiet zone. Ultimately, that is not a decision that the design dictates, but it's an operational decision that's made by the FRA as they look at how the system is going to operate in the equipment that is being included. So that is an important consideration as we talk about what's been included here. So with that, if we could go to the next slide, please. I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Steve Gaskell, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the operating expense, and that being the recurring cost annually for the operations and the maintenance of the service. Steve?
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. As Mark mentioned, I'm going to go through how we developed an annual operating expense estimate. So first, just to cover what is included in that. That's vehicle operations and maintenance, also non-vehicle maintenance, so any maintenance that needs to be done to the track along the right-of-way. This also includes general administration and operations, as well as the labor for operators themselves. And finally, materials, supplies, utilities, fuel costs, all of that. So all of that is included in the annual operating expense. One thing to note that is not included in this estimate is any major maintenance or rehabilitation of structures, as well as trail costs. So that would mean if there is, a major rehabilitation of a bridge that is needed 30 years from now, we have not annualized that cost as part of this estimate. And so this estimate was based on our current operating schedule, the run times from end to end, and the headways that we would like to achieve. So next slide, thanks. So how do we come to this? We developed what's called a benchmark cost estimate. So we looked at similar passenger rail operating costs to estimate what a reasonable range might be for this passenger rail. So we selected 6 different systems to use as representative lines. Each of these systems, which I'll go through in a moment, operate a single train line using either electric or diesel multiple unit vehicles. And then we took their annual operating expense as reported to the National Transit Database and calculated that in terms of per train revenue mile. So the assumptions that we made is that this would be an all-day end-to-end service. So that means trains run from Pajaro to West Santa Cruz every time. It would operate from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Every day of the year, with an approximate end-to-end runtime of 45 minutes and a headway of 30 minutes. So a train would be arriving every 30 minutes in each direction. Next slide, please. So these are the 6 different systems that we used as benchmark to come up with our estimate. So we have 3 that are in California. We have the EBART, and that is the section of BART that runs from Pittsburgh to Antioch. We have the Sprinter that's in northern San Diego County, as well as SMART. And then we chose 3 from Texas: Capital Metro, which operates in Austin; TexRail, which operates from Fort Worth to Dallas; and the A-Train, which operates from Denton County to Dallas. So each of these, we determined their total annual operating expense, the total train revenue miles, and then what that operating expense per train revenue mile would be in 2023 dollars, because that is the last year available that we have data. One thing to note is that we have a mix of service types here, and I'll explain what these mean. A directly operated service means that the transit provider is also employing and providing the service. So in this case, right, EBART is employing the train operators and they are running the service. For a purchased transportation service, that means that for instance, while Capital Metro is the overall owner of the transit service, they are contracting out to another entity to actually operate the service. So those folks are not direct employees of Capital Metro. And so we can see there's a range, a broad range of annual operating expenses per train revenue mile here, although most of them are falling in the $50 to $60 range. Capital Metro is definitely an outlier, and we did some research to figure out why it was such an outlier and learned that it's because of the nature of their contract through which they provide the service. Next slide. So here's just a graph showing that same information. So you can see, with the exception of Cap Metro, most of these fall within kind of a general range. And the blue ones here are the purchase transportation, and the green ones are the directly operated ones. So next slide. So to calculate our annual operating expense, we developed a conceptual train schedule and determined how many train revenue miles we would have to run each year. That came out to just over 500,000 train revenue miles. And then we took the average of the costs from our benchmark properties. That came out to $63.09. Multiplied those and then escalated it using inflation index to $2025, since the figures that we had were from 2023, to develop this estimate. So for 30-minute headways, which is what is the ultimate desire as envisioned in the California State Rail Plan, your average annual operating expense would be $34 million. And we also wanted to include, just as a point of comparison, what a 60-minute headway would look like. And that average annual operating expense would be $17 million. We've also included kind of a high-end range, which we're calling contingency here. But that's not additional, that's inclusive. So you can consider your range of being 34 million to 41 million. And the reason why we did that is because we are intending to run hydrogen trains. This is technology that is rapidly developing and still very new. So we want to account for that as a variable. And also understanding the historical experience of Santa Cruz Metro and their past labor agreements. So I understand there are a lot of questions coming through about why these are presented in 2025 dollars. We are doing that because of the nature of the project, and we don't have a specific operating date to use yet to advance that. And I believe that's the end of the operating.